Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another Family Matters. As you know, we have guests from all around the globe. We've had them from the UK, of course. We've had them from Ireland. We've had them from America. But we're getting closer to home, and so I'm delighted today to have an Australian. Our friends from across the ditch. His name is Andrew Cooper, and he's the founder and national director of something called CPAC. So, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simon.
Hey, it's always good to be interviewing our Australian, cousins or brothers and sisters, but there'll be a number of people, and you and I have been talking before we came on for the chat, that people here in New Zealand won't know what CPAC is. In fact, there'll be viewers right now going, what is that acronym for? So let's start with the real basics. What is CPAC?
So CPAC's the Conservative Political Action Conference. It's a version of the US CPAC, which was established almost 50 years ago. With Ronald Reagan was the inaugural keynote speaker, and Mr. Reagan, President Reagan, later continued to attend CPAC and represent the Republican Party at the Conservative Political Action Conference. And we were the first country to approach the Americans and say, look, we think this is a great conference, a great concept, and we'd like to take this to Australia. And they agreed, and since then there's a half a dozen countries that now have taken a version of the CPAC into their countries, and that's Brazil, Hungary, Japan, Mexico. There's been a CPAC in Israel. The Americans and the Australians did a pop-up CPAC during the height of the student riots in Hong Kong. So the CPAC brand is sort of spreading globally now. And it all harks back to that initial startup of the CPAC and the values that Reagan in particular sort of, propagated and spread around the world. And we subscribe to those values as conservatives. And our tagline is our mission is to spread the best of Reagan, Thatcher, and one of our Australian Prime Ministers, Howard, spread the best of them, throughout the country. So that in a nutshell is what it is, and that's where it's come from.
Well, I just think, look, I've followed CPAC for years, particularly through America. I've not yet got to any of the conferences there. I'm looking forward to actually coming to one of yours in Australia later this year. And as you say, it's bringing about the best of conservative conversation. And having myself been in politics, I was always struck, particularly our younger supporters on the right or the conservative right often had pictures of Reagan and Thatcher. I mean, from your perspective, leadership and work, why are those two in particular? Not to take away from John Howard, we had him for a political conference here. What an impressive individual. But what is it about the likes of Reagan and Thatcher? Why have they had so much influence in your thinking?
To my mind, Reagan and Thatcher had their values, and John Howard did as well. They had their values and they stood by them. And unusually in this day and age, politicians that can articulate and then live their values, I think are kind of missing now. Most politicians now, they smell the winds, they read the polls, they have their young advisors them telling what to pitch into the marketplace. They don't really stand for anything. They tell us that they're there to reflect the values of their constituency. To me, I think there's a yearning amongst some Western countries for a return to, understanding what your politician actually stands for, and seeing that even under trying and difficult circumstances, they won't be swayed. And as Thatcher said, this woman will not be for turning. And I think that's what attracts us and our supporters. And I certainly can speak from an Australian perspective. I think there is a yearning for that return to values-based politicking, rather than just reading the polls and flying where you think the best short-term political hit is.
I'm grinning quite a bit for having, in my case, Andrew, in Parliament for 12 years, and would like to think you'd have to get a second opinion, but more principle or value driven, which made it very difficult because what you just described is very much New Zealand politics. It's just driven by the wind, what's the latest polls, and I did have to laugh when you said about very young advisors who, for the best of intentions often, but don't have that depth of experience either in life or, if you will, in sort of philosophy. So I'm assuming when I think of CPAC...
and look, I think... Sorry, Simon, to interrupt, but I think it's not just New Zealand, it's not just Australia. I think certainly it's the US, it's the UK, it's probably most Western nations. It's certainly most of Europe now. So I think certainly there are left-leaning politicians that have a very strong sense of what their mission is. But I think on the conservative side, obviously there is winds of change now over the last couple of years, and the Trump election return to the presidency sort of is indicative of that. But there's certainly a change, the pendulum sweeping back. And I think those conservatives, libertarians, whatever words you want to use, I think there is this sort of, I've used it before, this word, the yearning, right? There's this deep-seated kind of feeling that we need to return to what we stand for.
It's certainly something I seem to have picked up, particularly from the younger generation, as you say. There's that, to use your word, a yearning. They're not quite sure what. They just feel something's not right with the current, I'll use the word, progressive setting. So I assume that your work with CPAC, then you've obviously got a conference. Do you do sort of wider work to help educate people, as well as sort of an ongoing rather than sort of a 2 or 3 day conference each year?
Yeah, so we like to think that we can spread our conservative values through our conferences, but also through impactful campaigns. And probably the most impactful campaign over here in Australia in recent years was the Voice to Parliament campaign. I'm not sure whether New Zealanders are familiar with that, but that was a proposed change to the Constitution to give special recognition to our Indigenous population here in Australia. And there's not a person, there's not one Australian I could even think of that wouldn't be sympathetic to the plight of particularly remote area Aborigines. But the Voice of the Parliament was never going to help that circumstance. And the left saw this as a wedge, an attempt to use wedge politics to divide the country, using race-based amendments to the Constitution to do so. And so one of my co-directors is a very well-known Indigenous man, Warren Mundine. Now, Warren is a former president of the Australian Labor Party, would you believe? But he has been on a journey over his life and now rejects certainly the new left and probably aspects of the old left. He says that the party left him, he didn't leave them. But I know that Warren's left a little bit. But he and another Indigenous politician in Australia called Jacinta Price led that campaign against the Voice to Parliament. And CPAC was well and truly in the mix and in the thick of that. And that went, we were the first organisation to actually start campaigning against that. And at the time, it had a 70% approval rating, that proposed change to the Constitution. But by the time Jacinta and Warren had finished campaigning, the referendum was held. It was a 60% no. So it was certainly a very impactful campaign that they embarked on. And that's what we see as our mission, basically. That was very much a values-based objection to inserting a race-based proposal into the Constitution. We didn't think we'd win it, to be perfectly honest. But at the end of the day, you've got to fight your battles based on the values you believe in. And I guess what was very pleasing for us as Australians was that, I think these are the values of most Australians, and I think that was brought out in the referendum. And I hope that campaign and the Trump ascendancy or reascendancy to the presidency, Milei in Argentina, what's happening in Hungary and Italy and other places around the world, I hope that gives our conservative politicians in our neck of the woods, down under, I hope it gives them some confidence to say, you know what, there are people out there that want you to be true to your values and to stand up and speak to them.
I think there are some green shoots, if I could use that analogy here. I've certainly been talking to different right-leaning politicians, and exactly what you've just said, Andrew, pointed them to Meloni in Italy, Oban and Hungary, obviously, even what's happening in America now with Trump. Not that they have to agree with everything he does, but actually we are seeing a rejection of the left wing, but they're needing to embrace and understand the values of the right. So some green shoots, but there does seem, I can only speak for New Zealand, still seems to be a bit of a blinkeredness in that space. Again, it's more just poll driven, what appears to be popular. For what it's worth, in following The Voice, because I think a lot of New Zealanders watched with concern, to be honest, not your campaign, but what was Albanese was trying to do, because we're a very divided country. Left-wing governments have divided us based on race, on gender, on sex, you name it. It's all been divisive, and it's not particularly helpful. But yeah, trying to inculcate those good values. And as I say to a lot of young people and older ones, it's about turning up to the fight, regardless if you're going to win or lose. If you have good, solid values and principles, then you will stand firm. You might not always win, but you're there, and that's important. And in your case, you won.
Yeah, well, we did win. Well, the Australian people won in the end. It's just interesting when listening to you. You know, the issues in New Zealand are very similar to the issues in Australia, and as we talked about, the issues in many Western countries. I mean, the issues in the UK at the moment are, pretty profound, I think. So they're at a real kind of tipping point, I think. But one of the reasons I founded CPAC, and this goes to, what is CPAC? Well, I've explained what it is, but the underlying reason why I think CPAC is really important in the Australian context is it's a broad tent. It's not owned by any political party, and we have a number of conservative political parties in Australia. Obviously, the Liberals and the National Party are the dominant parties and will always be the alternative to Labor, but we have others. So it's a broad tent, and the way I look at it is that Conservatives with a raft of concerns across the political spectrum could all gather in one big annual event, and they can discuss freely what they believe in. And it just seems absurd to think that somewhere where you can discuss freely your concerns and your thoughts and your opinions is needed in our, so-called liberal democratic countries. But I really do think it is, because I at the first CPAC, it really was brought home to me. Before we even launched the first CPAC, or had the first CPAC in 2019, I had Anthony Albanese, who was then the leader of the opposition, speaking out against CPAC even having a right to exist. We had the foreign minister in the Labor opposition speaking out against CPAC and calling us a cavalcade of hate. These are just we had the current Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, speaking out against CPAC, the current Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, speaking out against CPAC. And their whole thing was, anyone who believes in these values is clearly like a racist, a sexist, is full of hate. I mean, it's just so maddening, to think that this is where we've become. And I had two people come up to me at that first CPAC, and they both told similar stories. The first one, she came from the central coast of New South Wales. The CPAC was in Sydney. And she'd come down and she was telling me how it's the first time she'd been with so many people. And she felt like she was home. She could talk to these people. And she started crying. She started, welling up. I had to give her a hug. She just felt like that, where she was from, it was so suffocating that she'd go to dinner parties and they'd be rabbiting on with the same nonsense. And if she felt she'd be ostracized from her community group if she spoke and said what she said. And she comes to that CPAC now. She's found her tribe, if you will. And now she can speak more freely. She's now got new connections with people who think like her. And that has a ripple effect through the country. And that's really the reason, the underlying reason why sometimes these big events, these big conferences are so impactful.
Well, it's among many reasons I want more Kiwis to actually know what CPAC is and does, and for Kiwis in particular to know that it's just across the ditch, because actually we have the same, and it won't surprise you, Andrew, but we have the same dynamics here. People who feel isolated. I'd say it's one of the tactics of the regressive left is to make people feel that their views are at odds with everybody else's, when in fact often there's many people who are allied. But I was particularly struck with what you were saying from Dreyfus and Albanese and others. We have exactly the same dynamics here. Again, it won't surprise you that any group on the right, even the most moderately right group or person who wants to talk about a topic, they will basically try to deplatform. It's quite extraordinary because you use the term rightly, a liberal democracy, which means that we're allowed to have different viewpoints, but it doesn't seem to be that way for, dare I say, the Albaneses of the world. I'm going to mention her name, which will lose me a few viewers, but Jacinda Ardern, when she was here in New Zealand, they just don't like it. They don't like a discussion. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, we had a recent proposal called the Misinformation Bill, and that was an attempt to kind of censure free speech, particularly online and social media. But we know what happens with those bills. They expand and they expand. And of course, then we have now an e-safety commissioner, and her mandate is to trawl through the internet and the interwebs and try and shut down what can be deemed to be hurtful or nasty commentary. And the trouble with these sort of organisations and these sort of bills is that we know that they'll start at a very tight sort of kernel of what most people would think would be sensibleness. But the trouble is they then expand and they get weaponised by the left. And we've seen this time and time again. So changes to the law in Australia, and I'm sure in New Zealand, are very sort of troubling. We have a human rights commissioner, as I'm not familiar, but I'm sure you do too. Which original mandate is to look after the human rights of all Australians, but it's been taken over by the left, and it's really used as a way to attack and shut down the free speech of people that may be saying things that the collective don't like. And this is what socialism's all about. It's about the majority who receive the benefits of society beating up on the minority who they don't like. And the pendulum swinging back. I mean, you can see it a little bit. We can see it a little bit here in Australia, and I think it's beholden upon all conservatives to gather and get together and give the politicians who want to break out of this nonsense, give them the confidence and the support that they need to feel that they can do it. And again, that's why we have these big gatherings, Simon. There's nothing better than putting someone on stage and them a politician, speaking a little more freely than they otherwise would, and getting a rousing ovation and a lot of support, because they don't get it many other places.
No, and look, everything you're saying will echo with viewers here in New Zealand and actually in other Western countries who watch this. As you say, the weaponisation, we've got lots of these codes of conducts which get applied now, including in private professional associations like real estate agents and so forth, where a code of conduct's put in, but instantly weaponised by the left to shut down alternative opinions. Not about actually real estate, just any other topic or opinion. We've seen it in our parliament. Big push just before I was leaving, something I always fought against, was to have codes of conduct on MPs. And it's not that I want bad conduct, it's just I know darn well it'll get weaponised. Someone says something wrong or uses the wrong pronoun, before you know it, you've been hauled in front of a court. And you mentioned your e-safety commissioner. If you don't mind me asking, is she the one behind prosecuting, or Billboard Chris, the guy who walks around with a billboard, a Canadian, talking about gender? He's been hauled over the Australian courts.
Yeah, I'm not sure where they went through the e-safety. I'm sorry, I can't. I know Billboard Chris, and he's come to Australia. I can't recall exactly whether that was via the e-safety commissioner. But the e-safety commissioner attempted to sue Elon Musk and X.
Good luck with that.
Thankfully, they went down in a flaming heap. But and we could just, and that was never. The remit of the e-safety commissioner was never to attack organisations. It was more to just make sure that there was no sort of hateful comments going on. But of course, the trouble with those sort of hateful, a concept such as hate is all how you feel about it and how you take that. Some people can say, I've had comments from people. I've heard people who say that they support Donald Trump getting screamed at by left-wingers saying, "You're so hateful." And I'm looking at these people screaming at them, thinking, well, people that are exhibiting the most hate here is clearly people doing the screaming. So it's a very contentious issue, these sort of words that revolve around people's feelings, and as I said before, they always get weaponised. So it's our job, and I know Family First in New Zealand's, one of the organisations that's really pushing back on this sort of nonsense. And I encourage you to keep doing that, and congratulate you on the work you've been doing. I know Bob has come to CPAC on a number of occasions, and he's a terrific bloke, like most Kiwis that I know, even though we have our brotherly squabbles.
Well, we keep sending we seem to keep sending lots of Kiwis over to you guys, flooding your country with Kiwis at the moment. That's another topic.
Yeah, that's another topic, but it's wonderful. It's a wonderful relationship, I think, us Kiwis and Aussies have, and I always love visiting you guys, and I hope you do continue to come over, and I hope Bob comes over, and Simon, I think you were saying before you might be coming over for CPAC as well, and we'd love to see you here. And bring a few of your mates with you.
Well, and that's the hope. I mean, as a bit of an advertisement, give us a sense of, I know, but give us a sense of some of the big names. I mean, you've had Tony Abbott, you've had Jacinta Price, you mentioned. You guys attract some very big names there.
Yeah, we've had the former leader of the Freedom Caucus in the US, which is the largest sort of faction within the Republican Party. So Mark Meadows was the leader of that, very prominent Republican, and he later became Trump's chief of staff in the first administration. We've had a whole bunch of people. We had Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister of the UK, visited this year. We have most of the Australian politicians drop in, and see us. We have some that just turn up and listen to the conference, don't necessarily want to be on stage. And we have, and I take a contingent now so the US CPAC is on in a few weeks' time, and I'm taking a contingent of around 20 Aussies, including some politicians, with me to the US. So it's, it's good fun. I've been to Japan, I've been to Hungary, I've been to UK, American CPACs, and what I love about it is everyone's thinking the same thing. There's always local, nuances and cultural differences, but at the end of the day, everyone has the same overarching concerns. And the great thing about it is you go to the US CPAC, you see 15,000 people packed into an auditorium. You meet all these people afterwards. They've all got ideas about how to propagate the values that we believe in. You can come back home and you can build your confidence, and you can build your networks just based on the ideas that come out of those international CPACs. So I hope one day, we have a lot of Kiwis come to Australia, but maybe one day we can get a CPAC up and running in New Zealand as well. That'd be fun,
never know. It'll be great. But you've articulated the key point, and I'll wrap things up here, because it is about networking. You've touched on it a couple of times. It's first and foremost understanding, educating, celebrating good conservative values across that spectrum, from conservative to libertarian and everything in between. But it's also that sense of belonging, that actually there is another group, a tribe, I think was the word you used, that actually share these values. And I have to say, you're going to be having an amazing time in America. I think CPAC America this year is going to be a humdinger.
Yeah, with the president speaking, the change that's occurred there, they're chock full of confidence now, the Republicans. So, we all hold our breath a little bit with President Trump. We all sort of, wish him the best and hope he does his best. But, we know he can be a little bit erratic sometimes. So,
put diplomatically.
But, we all have, exactly. We all have hope, right? So I'm going there, and I've seen him speak many times. I've been in many rooms with him. He's a very impressive individual, particularly one-on-one and with crowds. What you see on TV is not the President Trump. He speaks for 2 hours at CPAC in the US, and then you get a 30-second snippet, by the left-wing media back home, right? Now, I defy anyone to speak for 2 hours and then not have their speech cut down in 30 seconds of something a little embarrassing or a little bit untoward. So he really is quite an impressive individual in person and in front of crowds, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him speak again this year.
Well, then the final question, and a very, very easy one, turning to Australia. If people want to find out about CPAC in Australia in particular, and as I say, you have your conference later in the year, where do people go? What's your website?
So our website is cpac.network. That's CPAC.network. If anyone from New Zealand is interested in coming over, please just reach out via the website. We're happy to do special pricing for our cousins across the ditch. It's still a long way to come.
So you're going to double the price?
No, we'll leave that to our taxation system. We'll just... we're very happy to have you guys over. I'd love you to come and join us. And one day, Simon, I think we might try and get a CPAC in NZ, hey?
I think it's a great idea. And we run our family forum each year, but that's not a CPAC. There's a real opportunity here. Hey, Andrew, really appreciate your time. Actually, really appreciate the work that you are leading, and importantly, as one of the founders, you got this off the ground. So thank you for that, and thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, and congratulations for the great work you guys are doing as well.